Hey, Thomas, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Not too bad. Yourself?
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining the webinar here. I am going to get this screen shared, and we'll go ahead and jump right into it.
What's your party affiliation? I couldn't find that.
I'm independent. I'm independent because I believe that the parties have a tendency to get hijacked by the CIA. The two-party system, to me, appears to be two heads of the same monster, and the Libertarian Party has a tendency of nominating people who don't help them win. So I'm a liberty guy, and I believe that we need to end the Fed and go green instead. I've been campaigning on common sense, fresh ideas since 2002 in Michigan, and I would be honored to accept the Libertarian nomination. I don't have confidence in the Libertarian Party actually doing the right thing. I think that when they nominated, what's his name, Gary Johnson, I think his name, right, from the last two election cycles. I mean, the guy stuck his tongue out on national TV just as he was gaining traction within the national polls. So I don't think he had any intention of winning. And so the question is, and although a gentleman named, another guy named Vermin Supreme, guy's brilliant, and he communicates the ideas of the Libertarian Party very, very well. But he's never going to be taken that seriously at a national level, and I think that that tends to do more harm than good. So until the party system can show that they are not directly in the pocket of the CIA, I think that the only way to regain our liberty in America is to elect an independent.
That's very noble. I'd almost completely agree. I just became a libertarian last June.
Did you really?
Yep. I actually refused any label until then. I was just independently registered to vote.
Yeah. I think, what I'd like to be able to communicate is that every American who believes in the Constitution, who believes that our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should be applied evenly to all people, that makes you a libertarian, right? Except that the Libertarian Party is kind of, they punted the football on that. They're not doing a very good job of making it happen. So.
Yeah, we definitely have some hierarchy issues.
Yeah, it seems so. You want to jump right into this? It's the two of us today, and hopefully it's
give me like 30 seconds. I'll just make a cup of coffee and we'll grab.
Absolutely.
That noise you hear is my power wheelchair here. Let me turn my camera on.
I'm going to take my headphones out to see if you can still hear pretty well. If not, then I'll put them back in. So give me a second here.
I'll turn my camera on for a reason, but
is it better with the headphones, or can you hear me okay now?
I can hear you just as good now.
Okay. All right. You good to go? You ready to go?
Yeah, I just was going to turn my camera on, but it doesn't seem to want to.
Oh, let me see if there's a way to.
It might be hijacked by another program.
Yeah, no, I think I did that because I thought there might be more people. We might have more people, and a lot of people have been. Let's see here. Make host remain putting in necessary video. Hmm. I guess I've got you. The settings on this are blocked, so I'm not able to get your video. Oh, there you go. We got it.
Let me turn it down. Oh,
Cool.
that down. Yeah, so I'm in a crowd-funded 20-year-old wheelchair
Okay. Wow.
because the state systems wouldn't give me anything that wouldn't actually lead within a few months to my being bedridden.
Wow. How did you end up in a wheelchair?
I've been in a wheelchair since I was about 4.5, but I've never stood or walked. I have osteogenesis imperfecta. I had over 1,000 fractures by the time I was age 16.
Wow.
But I still graduated high school on time with an advanced Regents diploma. Yeah, so I'm a high IQ, hardworking kind of guy. I live in a rural area. I butcher and grow my food. And I have a lot of skill, a lot of knowledge, a lot of value. And the government says that you can either live or you can work and die. I don't have the choice of work and staying alive.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of misaligned incentives with our current system that we need to fix.
Yeah, I mean, helping needs to be helping, not helping under rules that keep you from improving yourself and your happiness.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that we're all kind of dealing with the suppression in different ways, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on your situation. I mean, they all affect us. I mean, the other forms of oppression affect my community, which is my greatest source of actual and valuable help. And the Fed, right? If everybody in my community had a third more, and they're all already willing to help me, how much better could my life be?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. Yeah, and that comes with having an equity ownership in our monetary policy. Do you want to? So this we've got 40 minutes. I'm recording this so that I can share it online, share it with people. We can go ahead and jump through this, and then maybe you can, if you have questions, then we can go ahead and talk through it, and maybe we could talk offline, and I can get to know you a little bit better as well, if that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Do you go by Thomas or Tom?
Tom or Thomas, never Tommy. And it's Queeter, never quitter, rarely quieter.
Sounds good. All right, Tom. So what we're chatting about here is, a plan to end the Fed and go green instead, and why I think that ending the Fed is really the only way to regain liberty in America. And especially from the libertarian perspective, I know that it's good tax policy or even eliminating the IRS and getting legalizing cannabis and getting people out of prison so that we can get decriminalizing all drugs. We can get them out of prison, off the pills, off the streets, and back to work. Or if you want to declassify and open source the government, or even just to eliminate corruption in government. The only way to do that, in my opinion, the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to end the Fed and to go green instead. And so I intend to make the argument of why that is what we need to do.
Yeah, I was very interested in the go green instead as to your approach with that. And do you mean the typical go green, or do you have another idea?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. So if you just bear with me, I'll kind of whip through this. All right. So just to give you a background of my background, just to give you a quick introduction of who you're talking to. I'm Joe McHugh. I'm an independent candidate for President of the United States. And I have a background in finance and economics. I grew up in Detroit. I was born in Detroit, raised in suburbs, Metro Detroit, in the 80s and 90s. And there were three formative events in my life. The first one was watching the crack epidemic unfold on the evening news with my parents. I was lucky enough to watch from the suburbs as opposed to being from the inner city. But when I asked my parents why this was happening, to me, they said they don't know. That wasn't a good enough answer. To me, that meant that somebody was probably making money off of this, and therefore, and that just wasn't right. And so, at a young age, I committed to righting that injustice. I went to Michigan State University, earned a degree in international relations and political economics. Got my background in finance and economics at that point. Took a job at a bank as a financial advisor. After school, I was working at the bank as a financial advisor, at the investment bank as a financial advisor when the planes hit the Twin Towers. My immediate reaction was those MFers, because I believed that it was us. I thought immediately that it was an inside job. The definition of terrorism prior to 9/11 was that terrorist acts are generally committed by their own governments in order to bring about political objectives. And so when New York City is perhaps the most valuable and most heavily guarded city on the planet, don't tell me that planes just happened to get hijacked and flown into the Twin Towers on the same day that we stood down NORAD and, all sorts of other coincidences. I just don't buy it. So that was the second most formative event in my life. And the third most formative event in my life happened when I was in the Marine Corps. And I went to Asia and Africa. In the second deployment, we were traveling around Africa, and I authorized alcohol on board our Navy vessel for my unit. Everyone else was drinking. We weren't. There was a good reason for it, and I authorized alcohol in violation of that order, and I shouldn't have done it. What I learned was, with my mistake, that I had a suicidal alcoholic on my team, and I nearly lost my Marine. So when I learned that, I immediately corrected the decision. I called my commanding officer. I said, "Hey, look, I made a mistake." He took me as a team lead off the ship along with my senior enlisted, who kind of coached me into that decision in the first place. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. It's my responsibility as the officer in charge, as the leader. It's always coming back. Responsibility, ultimate accountability, and responsibility falls on the leader, no matter what.
Unless you're a president.
What's that?
Unless you're a two-party president.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we should get better leadership and better acceptance of responsibility and accountability. We're not giving it. So anyway, I felt pretty badly after that decision, and I wanted to get out of uniform. And so I took a phone into a top secret room and I turned it on. I made sure to delete everything off of my profile before I did that, so to make sure I didn't have access to anything. But in doing so, I was expeditiously processed out of the Marine Corps, honorably, but nevertheless expeditiously processed out. I was never charged with a crime while in uniform or outside of uniform, but the government did come after me for years and continues to obstruct my communications. They've intercepted my emails. They've blocked phone calls. And instead of going through on my phone, it'll get a busy signal. They have hijacked my phone and my computer, neither of which operate properly. I have received phone calls and lures for statutory rape, illegal Bitcoin sales, tax fraud, money laundering, you name it. They've come after me and tried to get me to bite.
That's why we have laws, so they can go after who they want.
What's that?
So that's part of the reason we have so many laws, so they can choose who they go after.
Absolutely, totally agree. And if we were to get beyond that, then we could eliminate most of the laws. And I think that it comes down to aligning policy and aligning our monetary policy with the public in order to get there, and we're going to cover that. So that led me to do some research, as you probably have done plenty of research too. What I learned was that, we established the illegal secret FISA courts, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, in 1978, ironically, the year that I was born. We used those secret FISA courts to stack our public courts with justices who are so extreme that they cannot garner a 2/3 Senate majority. We've passed 4 of those. 4 justices have received those nominations, all by the former Conservative Party, now the neoconservative Communist Party, the Republicans. The Supreme Court then helped corporations hijack our election system. Those same corporations now censor our speech. As you know, it was the 9/11 inside job that put things on, that kind of put this plan on steroids, because without passing the Patriot Act, things would be a lot more difficult. And as a result of the Patriot Act, they've effectively rendered our Constitution null and void. They cover everything up with fake news. We've got dirt, air that gives us asthma, water that's full of lead, causes developmental disabilities, food that makes us fat and sick. People can't even afford basic housing, and we build walls instead of bridges. We separate parents from children at the borders. We cover everything up with fake news. We don't even know it's real anymore. So that's probably why a majority of America wants a third option. And as a matter of fact, a majority of America have wanted a third option since 2006. And yet, while the Libertarian Party still has access, ballot access across the country, more often than not, they've failed to gain better than a 1% to 3% majority. And so we can only take one lesson out of that the American public is not buying what the LP is selling, at least not the way the LP is selling it. And so we need to put together a winning coalition. And this is my proposition. I believe that if we get back to basics and focus on the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, appeal to liberty-minded conservatives and Democrats as well, military veterans, intelligence officials, as well as minority groups who have been oppressed, and incorporate progressive environmentalists into a single American coalition, then we will have a majority. We can actually accomplish ending the Fed by going green instead. Now, I want to pause for a second because I know that a lot of libertarians will say, we don't like to focus on minority groups. And I get that. But here's the deal. If we had had a constitution that was applied evenly since the start of our country, we never would have had slavery in the first place. And we wouldn't have had a need for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. If we didn't, as a result of not applying the Constitution evenly, and as a result of losing the Federal Reserve, we've had all those prior actions. And ever since 2001 especially, we've had minority groups have been targeted, and I've even been targeted. You're targeted in other ways, right? So we're all targeted in some ways. And it's because the Constitution is not being applied evenly to all people.
Well, I can give you a fun statistic here.
Yeah.
4.8% of people as of a few years ago have a disability by age 65. And what's retirement?
Say it again.
42.8% of the population in this country has a disability by age 65, which happens to be our retirement age.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And that goes up with every year thereafter. So when it comes to disability issues and what you're talking about, me being targeted specifically, my view on that is that it's actually everybody. It's just that most people don't know it.
I totally agree with you on that. We're all targeted. We're all targeted. It's not so. I've told people that that I've been targeted by the government, and their natural response is, "You think that you're so important?" And I say, "No, it's not just me. It's everyone. It's all of our speech has been targeted. All of our rights have been targeted, and we're all in this fishbowl. And it's like, what exactly is going on here?" So this is, and I think that. What's that?
It's easy to shoot fish in a barrel.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right about that. And the fish in the barrel comes from bad incentives, right? That leads to bad outcomes. I mean, the Federal Reserve is owned by the member banks. The citizens of America and the American government does not have an ownership stake in the Federal Reserve. And so when we do not have a voice, we already have seen it with our elections. When we no longer have a voice, we have no influence. And if we have no ownership in the Federal Reserve, we have no control over monetary policy. Hence the result of loss of monetary value over time, as depicted by this graph, which shows that value of or purchasing power decreases as supply of money increases. And with worthless money and debt as money, we will forever be in debt. There's no way out of it.
Tax slaves.
Yeah, we are. Absolutely, we're tax slaves. To put it in context of today, since most people are going to be saying, okay, great, we have a coronavirus. Let's talk about that. The libertarian perspective would say that, okay, government versus the market. And we have, like I said, a neoconservative communist president who decided to use the Defense Production Act to compel General Motors to produce ventilators. And they are contracting 30,000 ventilators with GM for $16,300 per ventilator, total of $490 million. Now,
$6,000 per ventilator? How much do they normally cost?
Well, Ford is getting it done for $7,000 a ventilator. Better than half of that. And it's because they partnered with a ventilator design, company that has designs, and Ford's just stepping up to produce, to provide the manufacturing. So, once again, the market does do a better job than the government. And I think that most liberty-minded people would agree. And the reason why is because the market generates incentives that lead to outcomes. Now,
I can give you an example real quick out of New York. Remington offered to make ventilators, and Cuomo has not exactly said no, but he's not responded. And meanwhile, he's using the National Guard to, well, his language was originally to seize the ventilators and PPE from upstate hospitals for New York City. And then he changed that the next day because of a whole bunch of us calling him out, myself included. He walked back his language. He's now asking for 20% of the excess rather than saying he's going to seize it all.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so he's a Democratic governor, and I think it's important to talk about the Democrats as well, and because they talk. I think the Democratic Party is trending towards an anti-market stance, and a lot of people would say that they've been that way for a long time, and that's their prerogative if you want to believe that. What I think that the Democratic Party is talking about and acknowledging in their rhetoric is misaligned incentives lead to misaligned outcomes. That I think is what the real issue here. And so what I'm arguing is that if we have aligned incentives, we will have aligned outcomes. So in other words, liberty is not an unaccountable Federal Reserve because the ultimate result is the loss of our constitutional rights. And so I think it's important to understand monetary policy. People don't know what monetary policy is, right?
Nobody understands that.
Nobody understands monetary policy. And there's a good reason for it, too. I mean, the last time we had control of our monetary policy was 1913, right? So most people that were alive in there are very few people that are still alive. You'd have to be 108 years old, 107 years old. There's a couple people, but very few that were around before then. So a former Fed governor said that the financial system or monetary policy is the brain of the economy. And so that must mean the fiscal policy is the brawn, right? So in other words, right now, the United States of America is like Rocky Balboa trying to do a one-arm push-up because we only have our fiscal policy and not the monetary policy. If we go green and regain control of our monetary policy, we'll be able to do a two-arm push-up, which is a lot easier because we'll have both monetary and fiscal policy. We'll be able to have far fewer laws because we'll have aligned incentives. So President Lincoln in 1865, in his monetary policy speech, you probably know this, but he said that no duty is more imperative for government than the duty it owes the people to furnish them with a sound and uniform currency so that labor will be protected from a vicious currency. Right? So I bring that up because I think Lincoln understood that liberty is natural and that if you don't protect the people from the vicious currency, you end up losing your Constitution, right? So Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and he said that the laws, in the very first paragraph, he cited the laws of nature and of nature's God. The rights in the second paragraph that he listed as life, liberty, and love, or the pursuit of happiness, as he described it, are derived from the laws of nature and nature's God. So that means that if we're going to regain our liberty, we need to recognize that liberty is intrinsically tied to nature. And I think that's what we've been missing. Now, there's a huge majority of people on the Democratic side of the aisle that care about nature. There are people on the Republican side of the aisle that care about nature. And if we
care about nature, they don't understand natural law.
What's that?
They care about nature, but they don't understand natural law.
Well, right. You mean that it's a natural law?
Well, all right. So I grew up on a farm, and as I said earlier, I produce a lot of things. And so when I see what our government is doing, I often think, you have a terrarium as a kid? Ever?
An aquarium, but not a terrarium. But I know what one is. It's where you can.
Well, a terrarium. When something gets out of balance, usually it's a mold that will take over, or something will take over, and then the rest will die. And eventually, that something that takes over fails because there's nothing else.
Right.
And so when we force things, that's not natural.
Absolutely right, and that goes back to the market versus the government, right? The government trying to force things. And then, it's not working as well as you're finding a way to make it on a natural basis. Yeah, no, I agree with you, Tom. And I think,
I get called an anarchist a lot.
What's that?
I get called an anarchist a lot. I don't agree with that title for myself.
Yeah, I don't. I think that we need a form of government. It's just we need government that is properly aligned, and
Right.
it should be.
I agree with a lot of the practices purported by the anarchists of today, but I don't think they understand that it's not purely anarchy.
Right. Yeah. So, I think Lincoln understood also that liberty is constitutional, right? And what we're trying to do, or what we were supposed to be doing here, is creating a more perfect union. So liberty, what I like to say, what I argue, and what I believe that the LP or any candidate who wants to gain a majority so that we can end the Fed needs to make the argument that liberty is clean air. Liberty is fresh water. Liberty is healthy food. Liberty is affordable, healthy housing. Liberty is control of our own money. Freedom from the Federal Reserve, freedom from a vicious currency, as Lincoln said. Liberty is a greenback that retains its value over time, so that your time will never be less valuable in the future due to inflation.
That's a big problem for our elderly today.
You're absolutely right. I mean, they're pensioners, and then the cost of everything continues to go up, and then they end up going bankrupt. That's not how monetary policy is supposed to work, as you know.
And now they're using Medicaid and soon Medicare to take your property.
I'm not familiar with that, but that's interesting.
Medicaid liens are a huge thing in New York right now, and they're constantly shortening the window. There used to be a backdated window to where if you purchased something, they couldn't take it in as a repayment, if you will, for your Medicare or your Medicaid. And now they're literally, what's happening is that, let's say you turn 65 and you never made a lot of money, but your Social Security is enough to live on. You fall down, you break your hip, and at that age, you might end up in a rehab facility for a few months. Those costs go up, and they take your house. Then they sell your house to recoup those costs, but your house might have been worth 10 or even 100 times those costs. And so you're out the rest of that value, and they've taken your property.
Medicare or Medicaid is doing this?
Say what?
Medicare or Medicaid is doing this?
Medicaid is right now. There's a push for Medicare as well because that's taking over.
Wow, that's wrong.
So then after that, you're forced into an institution.
Right.
And my personal perspective on that as a disability advocate is that a prisoner is a prisoner. It doesn't matter what your prison looks like, and prisoners are profitable.
Prisoner is a what? Is a profit?
Yeah, prisoners are profitable.
Prisoners are profitable. Yeah, unfortunately. And that goes back to misaligned incentives. Yeah. Thank you for bringing these things up. And actually, I wouldn't mind chatting with you afterwards about potentially being, working with me as a disability advocate. I could use somebody like you. So you might be asking the question, okay, so if the Fed is the result or causing these misaligned incentives, what's the alternative to the Fed? And that's a question that I get all the time. If you're going to end the Fed, great. So what are you going to put in its place? Well, the opposite of a bank is a credit union. We're a bank, only the shareholders are members or have received a dividend voting power. In a credit union, everybody who's a client, in other words, all American citizens, would be owners of our credit union. And therefore, we would be eligible to receive a dividend, which Andrew Yang liked to call the freedom dividend. Thomas Paine called the citizen dividend. And I would support the same thing as well. I think that we ought to get back to Lincoln's greenback. Let's back it by nature. It's kind of a play off of the gold, except that gold is not tied to nature at all, and therefore doesn't provide the right incentives. But if we back our money by nature, then it'll be tied to the proper incentives. It'll also provide us with stable value, just like with gold. It would reduce corruption and increase transparency. So this is how
for general human behavior in regards to the environment around us.
Say that again.
I think what you just said would increase our general awareness and behavior in regards to the world around us.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because we'd be looking around at nature and seeing how things actually work, right? the idea, hopefully, is that once we regain our freedom and stop the entrapment that the Federal Reserve is causing, we might find out that politicians are willing to restore the fairness doctrine of 1987 and overturn the repeal of the net neutrality, and which is basically creating fake news. We don't have any information until we regain control of the information waves. Do you want to know how we would go about establishing the credit union and how we would tie the money to nature?
Absolutely. I actually personally choose a credit union over a bank myself.
Good. Yeah, I have both right now, but I do prefer a credit union. So it would be a 3-step process. And the first thing is to first start identifying our natural assets. So we've got national, state, and local parks, lakes, and rivers. Many of these happen to be in pristine condition, which is great. We would start with the pristine land and water. We would place it into a conservation trust. Right now, most of it's just owned by the federal, state, and local governments. I would rather see it placed into trust so that it's permanently held and reserved for nature. Now, many libertarians like to argue that the government should not own any of this land because it doesn't produce any revenue and it's a cost center. I can understand that. What this does is turn that cost center into a profit center, because we would end up auctioning off nature-backed currency, basically US dollar that's tied to nature. We would use the blockchain platform, which, by the way, it's not a new idea. The Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department are already in the process of transitioning the dollar to blockchain. You can read.
Yeah, they're pushing something like that through over the COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah, they've been working on this for a while, and I've written articles about Bitcoin. I believe that Bitcoin is actually a government project too. So. And so they're using blockchain because, blockchain saves the government a lot of money and it makes it easier to track transparency or to track the transactions. So again, we don't want to enable that unless we have proper incentives, because you're just strengthening authoritarian America. But when we own the government, when we own our government and own our money, then we change the incentives and we change our outcomes. So we auction off that currency.
If you go back, aren't public lands supposed to be owned by the people, not the government?
Probably. And this would accomplish that objective, because if we have a separate credit union that's owned by the people, it's not in fact held by the government, right? So that's why I think that instead of just ending the Fed and just having a treasury, I think it's better to actually have a credit union, because a treasury has no corporate structure. It doesn't enable the people with direct democracy, direct democratic representation, whereas a credit union does. So when you auction off the currency against nature, you end up with proceeds. And those proceeds would be dollars, which I like to call dirty dollars, since they're basically backed by oil and gas, and they fund drug money and all sorts of other stuff. So you take your dirty dollar fiat proceeds and you invest that into nature dollars, which are held in reserve. And we invest those into income producing natural assets like organic farms, regenerative farming, urban farms, local housing level, solar, wind, geothermal heating and cooling, green housing and buildings in general.
There's a big misnomer with food production. As I told you, I grew up producing my own. I mean, we were dirt poor. There was no other choice. But that lifestyle has taught me that it's cheaper and easier to do organic gardening than it is to use all those chemicals and buy your fertilizer.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
So like the Midwest farmers, they're the biggest slaves in this country. They make very, very little. They bring in a lot of money for the big ag companies that own them. You might have heard the old song, I owe my soul to the company store. It derived from the mining operations, which would mint its own money for the community that were all miners. And then, there was abuses in the way they sold them goods with that money. So that their labor would be devalued by giving them no choice in where to buy their things and upping those prices. So these farmers, they're forced largely under contract to buy their equipment, their chemicals, their seeds, and run their labor through these bigger corporations. And then by the end, they worked extremely hard and made very little.
Yeah, that makes sense because all the seeds they're no longer heirlooms, so they don't reproduce on their own.
Yep.
I just want to just do a quick time check. We've got about 6 minutes, maybe 5-6 minutes. So what I'd like to do is just whip through the end of this, answer any questions that you have off the top, and then we can take another conversation offline afterwards if you're good with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sorry. I have trouble not jumping in.
No, that's okay. I appreciate you doing it. Okay, so we invest into those assets. Those assets produce revenue, right? And that's where the money comes from a freedom dividend. So in other words, instead of having a Treasury Secretary preside over $25 trillion in debt, we would actually have assets, national assets that produce revenue that help preserve more nature. So in other words, the interest income that we come up with, I propose dividing it up into 3 different blocks. The first, up to 33%, could be a freedom dividend. The second, 33 to 50%, depending on how you move the numbers, will be invested into green assets to grow the asset pie, to restore, conserve, and protect nature, and to invest more into more fixed income assets that are helping to reduce impact of society, bring us closer in line with nature, and that generates more natural currency. So, and then also with the interest income, we use up to 33% of that to pay interest on deposits as well. You have any questions about how that works?
That sounds like growing ourselves like nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So this would be the result. We would end up with clean air, fresh water, healthy food, affordable housing, organic farming, renewable energy. We'd end up with a freedom dividend and democracy dollars. We'd have actually have the ability to declassify and open source government. And it would all be because we went green instead by ending the Fed with a clean, green, citizen-owned, and fully transparent credit union. So a quick recap. Unaccountable Federal Reserve, it's got to go because it took out our Constitution. And what we can do instead by ending the Fed is going green instead to restore our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, and Lincoln's greenback. You've already contributed $2.02, so I appreciate you contributing the dirty dollars so that we can end the Fed and go green instead. And now we've got to the point where we can use whatever time we have remaining to answer any other questions that you might have.
A couple, but they're not very related to what you just put forth because
go for it. Whatever you want. The time is yours.
Well, I am running for Senate in New York.
Okay.
And looking for endorsements.
Okay. All right.
If you want to talk and be willing, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
I intend to move with short video clips, anybody who's willing, and put it right on the website.
Okay.
And I also do work for a Libertarian POTUS candidate. I've been on his campaign since November. Daniel Berman, who absolutely feels like an outsider in the Libertarian Party because they don't cooperate with him, and there's a lot of, right, he's on the fringe of the Libertarians as far as the hierarchy is concerned. He might like to talk to you as well if you were willing.
Absolutely, I'm willing. Let's first talk about your Senate bid. What are your priorities and what do you want to accomplish, and would you want to champion this type of a platform as well?
I absolutely would get behind this platform.
Okay.
I mean, other than that, you've gone into a little more detail with a little more concept behind ending the Fed. I'm finding you align very well with the candidate that I work for, which is good. So my initiative as my run for Senate is to try to, a New York senator can't do a whole lot. But what we can do is introduce policy. And you know what? If it fails, it still gets introduced. And it's a point of contact. If you're familiar with marketing, you usually need between 3 and 7 points of contact where people hear your message in order for it to stick and them to start to understand it. And if you're familiar with Larry Sharpe, he's running again probably in 2022. So part of my initiative really is to use a lot of his policy and adapt it to my own perspective so that it gets introduced and gets heard. And, if it fails, it's at least a point of contact. It's work being done. I'm also very good at growing the party. This wheelchair, everybody that was involved in either fundraising for it or donating to it, either was or became a libertarian with two exceptions.
Are you
Which is
running for state senate or U.S. Senate?
state senate.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah,
And
if you want to champion the ideas of liberty and you want to get behind End the Fed and Go Green instead, absolutely. Let's grow the team. Let's do this.
right. And the other thing that I'm looking to do is, because of the nature of New York and its systems and its so-called helping, your options are limited the minute you're on welfare. And a lot of us with disabilities don't have a choice, right? If your disability, I hate to delineate, but let's face it, sometimes you have to. If your disability is lesser, like you have ADD or ADHD, you know, kind of a hard ass. I do actually believe we need ditch diggers, right? People to do physical work. And if you're capable of doing that, you should not be encouraged to be on welfare, because it's going to limit you. At least if you go digging a ditch, maybe you can figure out how to design a better shovel, if you will. Experience matters, hands-on work matters, and the only way to improve yourself is to get that experience. And the minute you're on welfare, you're incentivized to not get that experience.
Well, that's more of an incentive issue. Again, I think it goes back to, right, it's a case of misaligned incentives. And especially, I mean, maybe you know this better than I do. If you have a disability that prevents you from working in some ways, it's generally more difficult to earn a living, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So in that case, I think, you know, what I would like to do is I would like to simplify the tax code, restructure it, and make sure that we are providing not a UBI like Andrew Yang likes to talk about, but a TBI, a targeted basic income, that consolidates all of the welfare programs into something that's far simpler, far more effective, that provides a targeted basic income to people so that everybody has a dignity, can live life with dignity, and, you know, can do the work that they are able to do without creating bad incentives.
Yeah, that actually does align with another one of my concepts. I want to reduce the amount through my position that is removed from, say, your SSI when you make money, right? So that you can have a part-time job and not lose that SSI. And then instead of working for nothing, you're actually working to improve yourself in your situation.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. Yep. 100%. We're on the same, we're in 100% agreement on that. That's awesome.
You know, and beyond that, obviously, there's all kinds of taxes that can be reduced. I think it was Saratoga took the mandated state bed tax from what had been raised up to the maximum down to the minimum, right? So they didn't get rid of the tax, but they reduced it as much as they were legally able to. And that put some $4.5 million a year back into that county.
Huh. Okay. That's
so,
interesting.
I mean, there's a lot of systems of taxation that have just run wild, and we aren't actually able to reduce them.
Well, yeah, we have no control in our government right now.
Well, we have to run and obtain positions with people who want to do that.
True. That's true. That's true. So let's talk a little bit about your campaign. When is your filing deadline?
I believe it's May. Well, filing for what?
For state senate.
Oh, I've already filed.
Great.
Yeah. Well, on let's see, with the COVID-19 situation, they cut the petitioning period in half and reduced the signatures to like 30%, I believe. So that was a hustle, but we got it done. I'm actually in we're calling ourselves the Upstate New York Libertarian Coalition, but that's going so wild. We're going to have to take the upstate out of that.
Good.
And we've been helping each other. I think it was 4 of us that carpooled to the BOE. And, you know, it's been a good experience. We're getting a lot of cooperation. We're getting a lot more candidates using their experience with each other to hone their messages and to deliver a cohesive message. One of the problems with the MYLP is a lack of party unity. And I think people fail to realize that part of the reason the other two parties are so successful is that they have this blind party unity. Now, we don't want blind party unity, but we need to find our consensus or find those points where we agree and support each other on.
Yeah, I totally agree. Absolutely. would you like to set up, so I love the fact that we agree on so many issues. Would you be interested in setting up a joint fundraising committee or something like that? Maybe we can do some sort of a call. I can send out a notice to some people that I'm in touch with. You can do the same with your group, and just kind of start building the ticket, and providing support up and down, and seeing how many people we can get on board to spread this message.
Personally, I'm absolutely willing, but I do have a pretty vast campaign team that I need to discuss, because it's very important to me to not lose people. So their opinions need to be heard at least, right?
Sure.
I do practice consensus with much of my campaign because I feel I always need advice. The other thing is I do have cross-ticket support from Dan Berman, so I'll have to talk to him, make sure that's not going to cause waves, but he's a good guy. I don't think it will. And I'm absolutely interested. Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds great. Next steps then. You said that, Dan might be interested in the conversation. I'd love to have an introduction if you want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, after the introduction, he may actually invite you to his podcast.
That would be cool.
Yeah, I think he's got some 70,000 followers altogether.
Huge. Huge. That'd be awesome.
Really not that huge when you compare it to mainstream media, but for a libertarian, that's big.
That is big. That really is big. I mean, that would be my biggest event yet if I were to get on a podcast with $70,000. So absolutely, I'd be interested in that. It'd be great.
Awesome.
I don't have, and let's not do it over the air here, but I think I have your email from when you signed up for the event for this. So I'll send you an email. We'll get in touch that way, and let's continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Tom, thanks a lot for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
It was absolutely worth $2.
Excellent. Hey, thanks a lot. You take care, all right?
All right.
All right.